Think of a game that takes place in ancient Greece, has fixed camera angles, giant mythological creatures for bosses, RPG upgrades, and weapons on a chain. And it's not God of War. Rygar started in the arcade as an action platformer. Your goal was to get from point A to point B within a time limit, killing anything that got in your way. It was a pure action game designed to eat up as many quarters as it could in the arcade. Oh, and weird fact, the game actually first came out in Japan, and he didn't even have the name Rygar. He was just called The Warrior. And when Tecmo decided to port the arcade game onto the NES, they decided to make a lot of changes to the gameplay. And not for the first time. When Ninja Gaiden was in the arcade, it was a mediocre beat-em-up that most people overlooked. Then when Tecmo brought it onto the NES, they completely changed the gameplay and made it one of the classics of the system. So taking an arcade game and reinventing it for the home console was basically Tecmo's whole style. So what did Tecmo build when they got their hands on Rygar for the NES? Rygar had a big open world full of interconnected maps, and it was full of items that you had to find or earn so that you could access different parts of the world. There were permanent upgrades, and it rewarded exploration. So quick aside, the story of Rygar is there's a big evil guy who's taken over the land, and the gods couldn't find anyone who could take him on, so they resurrected the warrior Rygar. This is basically a zombie game. And you're named Rygar and the villain is named Lygar, because in the Japanese version they literally had the same name because the Japanese language doesn't distinguish between L and R. So in the English vocalization, they just gave them both the exact same name, and either no one caught it or no one cared. But if my explanation for the game sounds familiar, because it's a Metroidvania. Rygar came out the year after Metroid, and it came out before Castlevania. Hey, future mischief here. I don't know why I said Rygar came out before Castlevania. Metroid and Castlevania both came out in 86, and Rygar came out in 87. So any future references I make to Rygar coming out between Metroid and Castlevania, you can just ignore that. Back to me. Rygar is one of the earliest examples of a Metroidvania. Because Rygar came out right after Metroid, we don't really know if Rygar was inspired by Metroid. They could have been making them at the same time, and Tecmo just coincidentally happened to design a similar game. And in true Nintendo fashion, Rygar had no way to save the game, no passwords or anything. If you died, you just went back to the start of the area and you got infinite continues. Like a lot of early Nintendo games, it was made to be beat in one sitting, which led a lot of kids like me to just leave the Nintendo on for possibly days at a time because you didn't want to lose your progress. And actually, players have found that there was an unused password system in the game's code that got thrown out, and no one really knows why. But despite being one of the early examples of a Metroidvania, it doesn't really get included in the conversation with Metroid and Castlevania, even though it came out between the two. Metroid and Castlevania get the credit, and Rygar gets forgotten. Again. Now, when I was doing research for this game, I found out about the arcade game. The only one I ever knew was the NES game because that's the only one I ever played. I also found out that Rygar had a lot of ports, although none of them were considered as good as the original NES. But then I also found out in 2002, Rygar got a remake for the PS2. So, let's do an episode of Retro Remake while we're at it. Now, if you ever played the PS2 version of Rygar, the first thing you're going to notice is that it's God of War. Rygar for the PS2 is an action-adventure that takes place in ancient Greece, has fixed camera angles, giant mythological creatures as bosses, RPG upgrades, multiple weapon upgrades, and the main character's main weapon is on a chain. And it came out 3 years before God of War. Even God of War creator David Jaffe noticed the similarities and was so worried that people would think his game was a ripoff, he made a YouTube video specifically to denounce that Rygar had anything to do with God of War. But whether it's through direct inspiration, indirect influence, or coincidence, Rygar did it first and got none of the credit. God of War became one of the biggest franchises in gaming history, and most people don't even know the name Rygar. Tecmo called it a remake, but it had completely different gameplay. The one for the NES was half side-scroller, half over-the-top camera, and you needed to find items to get past certain areas. But the PS2 game was a pretty linear, fixed camera action-adventure. The stories were different. In the NES version, you were trying to free the world from the tyrant Lygar, and the PS2 version is your standard rescue the princess deal. The only similarities between the two games is a main character named Rygar and a shield on a chain. So calling it a remake is generous. It's more accurate to say Tecmo did what Tecmo had done before and just used the Rygar name to build something new. This is a franchise that reinvented itself 3 times, and each time it was ahead of its time. The arcade game became a Metroidvania before Metroidvania was even a word. The PS2 game built the template for what would become one of gaming's biggest franchises, and at every step, it got forgotten. Even the hero knew what it was like to be overlooked. A nameless warrior resurrected from the dead, fighting for a world that would never remember him. Pretty good metaphor for the franchise. But tell me what you think in the comments down below. Did Rygar deserve more credit? Does it matter who did it first if a later game did it better? And on a personal note, I'm coming up on the 1-year anniversary of me making this channel, and I would really love it if I could get to 100 subscribers by then. So while you're down there, leave in a comment. If you could hit subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. It would really help me out. See you next time.